The autumn wind howled across the Montana plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bite of an early winter. Sarah McConnell pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stood at the edge of what had once been her land. Her 2 children huddled close against her skirts. The bank notice, crumpled in her pocket, felt heavier than the old coat her late husband had left behind. "Mama, I'm cold," 6-year-old Emma whispered, her small hand finding Sarah's. "I know, sweetheart. Just a little longer." Sarah's voice remained steady despite the tremor in her heart. She gazed across the vast expanse toward Silver Creek Ranch, its buildings barely visible through the dust and dying light. It was their last hope, and Sarah McConnell had never been one to beg. The wagon wheels groaned under their meager possessions as they approached the main house. Sarah had sold everything else the good china her mother had given her. The rocking chair William had made with his own hands. Even her wedding ring. All that remained were necessities and memories too precious to part with. Jake Morrison emerged from the barn before they reached the house, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the fading daylight. Sarah remembered him from the few times he'd visited William, a man of few words, with eyes the color of storm clouds and hands that spoke of honest work. He'd aged in the 3 years since she'd last seen him, new lines etched around his eyes, a hardness to his jaw that hadn't been there before. Mrs. McConnell." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver. His voice was gravel and whiskey, softened by surprise. "I heard about William. I'm sorry." Mr. Morrison." Sarah lifted her chin, fighting the urge to look away from his penetrating gaze. "I've come to ask for work, not charity. I can keep books, cook, mend whatever needs doing. My children and we won't be a burden." 4-year-old Tommy peeked out from behind his mother's skirts, studying Jake with the fearless curiosity of the young. Jake's expression softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at the boy, then back to Sarah. "It's near dark. Come inside." The warmth of the house hit Sarah like a physical thing, making her realize how cold she'd been. The main room was simple but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Rough-hewn furniture spoke of bachelor practicality. It smelled of leather and wood smoke, coffee and the faint scent of lye soap. "Maria," Jake called, and an older Mexican woman appeared from the kitchen, her round face creased with concern as she took in the bedraggled family. "Dios mío," Maria murmured, immediately bustling forward. "Los niños, they are frozen. Come to the fire." As Maria fussed over Emma and Tommy, pressing cups of warm milk into their hands, Jake and Sarah stood awkwardly in the dim light. "I can pay a fair wage," Jake said finally. "Room and board included. The books are a mess, haven't had time since my foreman quit last spring. Can you cipher?" "I kept the accounts for our farm." Sarah's voice caught slightly on the word "our," but she pressed on. "I know cattle prices, feed costs, market rates. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Mr. Morrison." "Jake," he corrected. "And I know you're not. William spoke of you often." The mention of her husband's name was a knife between her ribs, but Sarah had learned to breathe around grief. "Then you know I'll earn my keep." Jake studied her for a long moment. In the firelight, Sarah could see the weariness in his features, the weight of running a ranch alone. Silver Creek was substantial, one of the larger spreads in the territory, but success in this harsh land demanded everything a man had to give, and then some. "The foreman's cabin is empty," he said at last. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You can start tomorrow if you're willing." Relief flooded through Sarah so suddenly she had to lock her knees to keep from swaying. "Thank you. You won't regret this." "I hope not." His tone was neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, concern, perhaps, or simply the wariness of a man unaccustomed to having a woman and children on his land. Maria helped them settle into the cabin, which was indeed modest but clean. 2 rooms, a main area with a cook stove and table, and a smaller room with 2 beds. after the woman left, promising to bring breakfast in the morning. Sarah tucked her exhausted children into bed. "Is this our new home, Mama?" Emma asked, her blue eyes so like her father's, heavy with sleep. "For now, my love, for now." Sarah sat by the window long after the children slept, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. The cabin was sparse but solid, a far cry from the home she'd lost. Pride warred with necessity in her chest. She'd sworn after William died that she'd never depend on another man's mercy. Yet here she was. A knock at the door startled her. Jake stood on the threshold, a ledger under one arm and a lamp in his hand. "Thought you might want to look at these tonight, get a sense of what you're dealing with." He paused, seeming to wrestle with words. "Sarah, Mrs. McConnell, I want you to know this isn't charity. I need help, and you need work. It's a business arrangement. Nothing more." The kindness in his gruffness nearly undid her. "I understand, and I prefer it that way." He nodded, setting the lamp on the table. "There's one more thing. The men cowboys can be rough around the edges. If anyone gives you trouble, you come to me. I can handle myself, Mr. Morrison, Jake." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I don't doubt it. William always said you were tougher than rawhide beneath the pretty face." Heat rose to Sarah's cheeks, though she couldn't say if it was from the compliment or the impropriety of it. Jake seemed to realize what he'd said and cleared his throat. "I'll leave you to it. Morning comes early on a ranch." After he left, Sarah opened the ledger by lamplight. The entries were haphazard, some in pencil, others in ink. No clear system to the chaos. She traced the numbers with one finger, already seeing patterns, finding errors. This she could do. This she could control. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind rattled the windows. But inside the small cabin, Sarah McConnell began to rebuild her life one ledger entry at a time, unaware that the stern rancher who'd given her shelter would soon become far more than just her employer. The Montana Territory was unforgiving, but it was also a land of second chances. And sometimes, in the vast loneliness of the frontier, two broken souls could find something neither expected if they were brave enough to reach for it. As Sarah worked late into the night, Jake stood on his porch, smoking a last cigarette before bed. He could see the lamp burning in the foreman's cabin, could imagine her bent over his books with that determined set to her jaw. He'd recognized it the moment she'd stepped down from the wagon, the look of someone who'd been knocked down but refused to stay there. It was a look he knew well. It stared back at him from the mirror every morning. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, for reasons he didn't care to examine, Jake Morrison felt less alone than he had in years. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness, but Sarah was already awake, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee Maria had taught her to make strong enough to wake the dead, as the older woman put it. 2 weeks had passed since their arrival at Silver Creek, and Sarah had established a routine that began before sunrise and ended long after the children were asleep. "Mama, do I have to go with you today?" Emma asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes as she emerged from the bedroom. "Just to the main house, sweetheart. Maria will watch you while I work." The girl nodded, already adapting to their new life with the resilience of childhood. Tommy appeared moments later, dragging his favorite wooden horse, one of the few toys they'd managed to keep. The walk to the main house was short but cold. November had arrived with teeth, and Sarah made a mental note to ask about warmer clothes for the children. Pride be damned when it came to their welfare. Jake was already in his study when she entered, hat tipped back, frowning at a letter. He looked up as she approached, and something in his expression shifted, a softening she was beginning to recognize. "Morning, Sarah. Coffee's fresh if you need more." "Thank you, but I've had my fill." She moved to the desk, noting the organized stacks she'd created over the past fortnight. "What's troubling you?" He handed her the letter. "Bank notice. They're pushing for early payment on the loan. Seems they've got wind of the trouble we had with the summer drought." Sarah scanned the document. her mind already calculating. How short are we? $300 by month's end. Or they start proceedings. Jake's jaw tightened. I've got cattle ready for market, but the prices are lower than last year. Sarah finished. I've been tracking the reports from Denver and Cheyenne, but there might be another way. She pulled out a ledger, pointing to her neat columns. You're owed money from the Hendricks Ranch for those horses you sold them last spring, and the Army contract for beef they're 2 months behind on payment. Jake leaned closer to look, and Sarah caught the scent of leather and soap, unsettlingly masculine. She focused on the numbers. I could write to Fort Ellis, she continued. A formal request from the ranch's bookkeeper might carry more weight than another complaint from a rancher. You'd do that. It's my job, she said simply, though the approval in his eyes warmed her more than it should have. Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into the ranch's operations with a determination that surprised even Jake. She reorganized the entire accounting system, wrote letters to debtors in her neat script, and even helped Maria with the ranch hand's meals when the older woman's arthritis flared up. You don't have to do that, Jake said one evening, finding her elbow deep in bread dough while Maria rested by the fire. Idle hands are the devil's workshop, Sarah replied, not looking up. Besides, Maria's teaching me her recipes. The men work harder on full bellies. Jake watched her work, noting the efficiency of her movements, the flour dusting her cheeks. You're not what I expected. Sarah McConnell. What did you expect? A grieving widow who needed GU aging. He admitted, not a woman who could probably run this ranch single-handed if she had to. Sarah's hands stilled. I've been saved once already, Jake, by a good man who gave me a home and children and purpose. When I lost him, I swore I'd never need saving again. And yet you came here. I came here to work, she corrected, meeting his eyes steadily. There's a difference between needing help and needing rescue. Jake nodded slowly. That there is. As November progressed, Sarah found herself adapting to ranch life in ways she hadn't anticipated. Jake taught her to ride, starting with the gentlest mare in his stable. Keep your back straight, he instructed, his hand briefly touching her waist to adjust her posture. Let her feel you're in charge, but don't fight her. Sarah tried to ignore the heat of his touch through her worn riding dress. Like managing ranch hands. Jake chuckled, a rare sound that transformed his face. Exactly like that. Within a week, she was accompanying him on shorter rides to check the nearer pastures. The vastness of the land still took her breath away, endless sky meeting endless grass, broken only by distant mountains and the occasional cluster of cattle. It's beautiful, she murmured one afternoon, reining in beside him on a small rise. Beautiful and brutal, Jake agreed. This land doesn't forgive mistakes. Neither does life. He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. No, it doesn't. The first real test came during a sudden November storm. The temperature plummeted, and Jake rode out with his men to bring the cattle closer to shelter. Sarah watched from the window, anxiety knotting her stomach as the snow began to fall in earnest. They'll be fine, Maria said, but her fingers worried at her rosary. Hours passed. Sarah put the children to bed, then returned to her vigil. When the men finally returned, Jake was supporting Sam, one of the younger hands, who'd been kicked by a spooked steer. Without thinking, Sarah rushed out into the storm. Bring him inside. Maria, we need hot water and bandages. As the women tended to Sam's injuries, bruised ribs, nothing broken, Sarah was aware of Jake watching her with that intense gaze of his. You've done this before, he observed as she efficiently wrapped the cowboy's ribs. Farm life teaches you many things, she replied. William broke his ribs twice, once during harvest, once breaking a horse. A lucky man to have you tending him. Their eyes met across the injured cowboy, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of growing connection neither was ready to name. The storm passed, but it left changes in its wake. The cowboys, who'd initially been wary of having a woman involved in ranch business, began treating Sarah with genuine respect. She'd proven herself not just with ledgers and letters, but with steady hands and calm presence in crisis. Mrs. McConnell sorted out that muddle with the feed supplier. She overheard one hand telling another, "Got us a better price than Jake ever did." "Don't let the boss hear you say that," the other laughed. But Jake had heard, and instead of anger, Sarah saw pride in his expression when he looked at her across the dinner table that night. The children, too, were adapting. Emma had befriended the barn cats and could often be found reading to them from her precious book of fairy tales. Tommy followed Jake like a shadow whenever allowed, absorbing everything about ranch life with the intense focus of a child who'd found a hero. Mister, Jake says I can help with the calving come spring," Tommy announced one evening. "Did he now?" Sarah glanced at Jake, who shifted uncomfortably. "Boy needs to learn," he muttered, "if you're agreeable." "I'm agreeable," she said softly, watching her son's face light up. Later, as she tucked Tommy into bed, he whispered, "I like it here. Mama, Mister, Jake's teaching me things Papa would have taught me." Sarah's throat tightened. "Your Papa would be glad to know you're learning." Do you think Mr. Jake could be our new Papa?" "Oh, Tommy?" She smoothed his hair. "Mister, Jake is our friend and employer. That's all." But as she left the cabin to return the account books to the main house, Sarah wondered if she was lying to her son or to herself. The way her pulse quickened when Jake smiled, the warmth that spread through her when their hands accidentally touched. These were not the feelings of a mere employee. She found Jake on the porch despite the cold, a blanket around his shoulders, staring out at the star-filled sky. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Thinking," he glanced at her, "about what young Tommy said at dinner, about the calving. He idolizes you." "I'm not a man worth idolizing, Sarah." She moved to stand beside him, close enough to share warmth, but not quite touching. "You're a good man, Jake Morrison. My children see it. I see it." "Your husband is gone," Sarah interrupted gently, "and I'll mourn him until my dying day. But William wouldn't want me to stop living. He'd want his children to learn and grow and find happiness where they could." Jake turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight, she could see the battle in his eyes, want warring with honor, desire fighting propriety. "Sarah, The books are balanced," she said quickly, before he could say something that would change everything. "The payment from Fort Ellis should arrive within the week. Silver Creek will meet its obligations." Jake nodded slowly, accepting her retreat. "Thanks to you." "Thanks to both of us," she corrected. "Partnership, remember." "Partnership," he repeated, the word carrying more weight than either of them acknowledged. As Sarah walked back to her cabin, she allowed herself one glance back. Jake still stood on the porch, a solitary figure against the vast Montana night, but he no longer looked quite so alone, and neither did she. Winter was coming in earnest now, with all its challenges and dangers, but for the first time since William's death, Sarah faced it not with dread, but with something that felt dangerously like hope. The December morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost painting delicate patterns on the windows of Silver Creek Ranch. Sarah was reviewing the month's accounts when she heard the commotion outside, men shouting, horses whinnying in distress. "What in the—" Jake's voice cut through the chaos, followed by a sharp cry of pain. Sarah dropped her pen and ran outside, her heart hammering. A cluster of ranch hands surrounded something on the ground near the corral. As she pushed through, she saw Jake lying in the dirt, his face contorted in agony, his left shoulder at an unnatural angle. "Damn horse spooked at a rattler," Sam explained, his young face pale. "Threw him hard against the fence post." "Don't just stand there," Sarah snapped, her voice carrying an authority that made the men jump. "Sam, Ride for Doc Hartley. Fast. Miguel, help me get him inside. Careful with that shoulder." Jake groaned as they moved him, his usual stoicism cracking. Just pop it back in. Done it before." "Not this time," Sarah said firmly. "That shoulder's dislocated badly. You move it wrong. You could do permanent damage." They settled him on the large sofa in the main room. Sarah sent Maria for water and clean cloths, then knelt beside Jake, gently probing the injury with experienced fingers. "Where'd you learn doctoring?" Jake asked through gritted teeth. "I told you farm life teaches you many things." She met his eyes, trying to distract him from the pain. "This is going to hurt when Doc Hartley gets here. I'll need to hold you steady." "You," despite his pain. Jake almost smiled. "No offense, Sarah, but—" "I've birthed calves, set broken bones, and held down grown men while Doc Hartley worked on them. I'm stronger than I look." The next hour tested that strength. Doc Hartley, a gruff man in his 60s, took one look at Jake's shoulder and shook his head. "Bad one. Gonna take some doing to get it back in place." Sarah positioned herself behind Jake on the sofa, her arms wrapped around his chest to keep him steady. She could feel his heart racing against her arms, the heat of his body through his shirt. "On 3, Doc Hartley said. 1, 2. He pulled on 2, and Jake's body went rigid against Sarah's. The sound that escaped him was primal, and Sarah found herself murmuring soothing words against his ear, holding him tight as Doc Hartley manipulated the joint. "Almost there," the doctor grunted. "Hold him, Mrs. McConnell." With a sickening pop, the shoulder slipped back into place. Jake sagged against Sarah, his breathing ragged. For a moment, neither moved, and Sarah was acutely aware of every point of contact between them, his back against her chest, her arms around him, her cheek pressed against his hair. "There we go," Doc Hartley said, breaking the spell. "You'll need to keep that arm immobilized for at least 2 weeks. Jake, no riding, no roping, no ranch work." 2 weeks. Jake struggled to sit up, and Sarah reluctantly released him. "Doc, I can't—" "You can and you will," Sarah interrupted. "The ranch won't fall apart in 2 weeks." Doc Hartley chuckled. "Listen to the lady, Jake. Seems she's got more sense than you." He turned to Sarah. "Keep him still. Mrs. McConnell. I'll leave laudanum for the pain, but knowing Jake, he won't take it." After the doctor left, Sarah helped Jake to his bedroom, a space she'd never entered before. It was Spartan, but clean, with a large bed, a washstand, and a single photograph on the dresser of a younger Jake with an older couple she assumed were his parents. "I can manage," Jake said as she helped him sit on the bed's edge. "No, you can't." Sarah began unlacing his boots. "Maria and I will take turns checking on you. The men need direction, I'll handle what I can. And Sam can oversee the rest." "Sarah, you can't—" "Can't what?" She looked up at him, challenge in her eyes. "Can't run a ranch, can't handle the men, can't make decisions I've been watching and learning for 2 months. Jake, trust me." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but anything major, I'll consult with you. Now, let's get you comfortable." The next 2 weeks tested Sarah in ways she hadn't anticipated. With Jake confined to bed, she found herself making decisions that affected the entire ranch. The first real test came 3 days into Jake's convalescence when she discovered a discrepancy in the cattle count. "We're missing 20 head, she told Jake, sitting beside his bed with the tally sheets. "Sam thinks they might have drifted south during the last storm." "Or been rustled," Jake said grimly. "There have been reports of cattle thieves working the territory." Sarah considered this. "I'll send Miguel and 2 others to scout south. If they don't find them by nightfall, we'll assume the worst and report it to the sheriff." "That's exactly what I'd do," Jake said, and the approval in his voice warmed her more than it should have. The cattle were found. They had indeed drifted, but the incident established Sarah's authority with the men. She made decisions quickly but thoughtfully, always keeping Jake informed but not deferring unnecessarily. "Your missus has a good head on her shoulders." She overheard one of the hands saying, "She ain't his missus," another corrected. "Well, she ought to be." The comment should have scandalized Sarah. Instead, it planted a seed of possibility she tried hard to ignore. The closeness necessitated by Jake's injury created an intimacy between them that was both comfortable and charged. Sarah found herself lingering during her visits, sharing stories of her childhood in Ohio, her courtship with William, her dreams for her children. "William was a good man," she said one evening, adjusting Jake's pillows. "Steady, kind, devoted to his family. We had a peaceful life together." "You miss him." "Every day, but—" She paused, searching for words. "I'm learning there are different kinds of missing. There's the sharp grief that cuts like a knife, and there's the gentle ache of fond memory. Lately, it's been more of the latter." Jake's good hand found hers where it rested on the quilt. He was a lucky man, Sarah, to have your love, your loyalty. "And I was lucky to have his." She didn't pull her hand away. "But life moves forward, doesn't it? Even when we think it's ended, it finds a way to surprise us." Their eyes met and held, the air between them thick with unspoken possibilities. Jake's thumb traced small circles on her palm, and Sarah felt heat bloom across her skin. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough. "Mama." Tommy's voice from downstairs broke the moment. "Emma won't give me my horse back." Sarah pulled her hand away, standing quickly. "Duty calls," she said with forced lightness. "Sarah," Jake's voice stopped her at the door. "Thank you for everything." "Partners, remember?" she managed, then fled before he could see how his touch had affected her. As Jake's shoulder healed, he began spending more time downstairs, watching Sarah work. She'd commandeered the dining table for ranch business, spreading out maps and ledgers, correspondence and contracts. "You've reorganized everything," he observed one afternoon. "It needed doing. Your system was—" She searched for a diplomatic word. "A disaster," he supplied with a wry smile. "I never had a head for paperwork." "But you understand cattle, land, weather, men," Sarah pointed out. "Those are the things that really matter out here." "Maybe, but paperwork keeps the ranch afloat. You've proven that." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We make a good team." "Yes," Jake said softly. "We do." The children had taken to spending more time in the main house during Jake's recovery. Emma would read to him from her fairy tale book, while Tommy peppered him with questions about ranching. "When I grow up, I'm going to have a ranch just like this," Tommy announced one evening. "That's so." Jake ruffled the boy's hair with his good hand. "Well, you're learning from the best. Your mama knows more about running a ranch than most men I've met." Sarah looked up from her ledgers, surprised by the compliment. Jake met her eyes over the children's heads, and something passed between them. Acknowledgement, respect, and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. Maria, watching from the kitchen doorway, smiled knowingly. "El amor finds its way," she murmured in Spanish, low enough that only Sarah heard. Love, was that what this was becoming? This warmth in her chest when Jake smiled, this flutter in her stomach when their hands touched, this sense of rightness when they worked side by side. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. On the last day of Jake's prescribed rest, Doc Hartley returned to examine the shoulder. "Healing well," he pronounced. "You can start using it again, but carefully. No heavy work for another week." "I'll make sure he behaves," Sarah said. Doc Hartley chuckled. "I don't doubt it. You know, Jake, in all my years doctoring in this territory, I've rarely seen a man recover so well. Good nursing makes all the difference." After he left, Jake flexed his shoulder experimentally. "Feels almost normal." "Almost isn't completely. You'll take it easy. as the doctor ordered. Jake stood, moving closer to her. "You're a bossy woman. Sarah McConnell." "Someone has to be," she replied, but her voice came out breathier than intended. They were standing very close now, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could smell the soap and leather scent of him. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and intense. "These past 2 weeks, having you here, seeing you with the Ledgers and the men and the children, it's felt..." "Right," she whispered. "I know. It's felt right to me, too." His good hand came up to cup her cheek, and Sarah leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed. She felt him lean closer, felt the warmth of his breath against her lips. Mister. Jake!" Sam burst through the door, shattering the moment. "Riders coming in fast. Looks like trouble." Jake stepped back, his business mask sliding into place. "How many?" "4, maybe 5. They ain't from around here." Sarah watched Jake transform from the gentle man who'd almost kissed her into the hardened rancher, and she realized that both sides were equally real, equally him, and God help her, she was falling for both. "Get the men ready," Jake ordered. "Sarah, take the children to your cabin and bar the door." "I'm staying," she said firmly. "This is my home too now." Jake looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded curtly. "Stay inside then, and keep the shotgun handy." As she gathered the children and ushered them to safety, Sarah realized the truth of her own words. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, perhaps even before Silver Creek had stopped being just a refuge and had become home, and Jake Morrison had become far more than just her employer. Whatever came next, she would face it as she'd faced everything else with courage, determination, and a growing certainty that her future was inextricably linked with the man who'd given her a second chance at life. The riders turned out to be cattle buyers from Cheyenne. Not trouble, but the moment of interrupted intimacy hung between Sarah and Jake like morning mist. For days afterward, they danced around each other with careful politeness, hyper-aware of every accidental touch, every shared glance. Winter had settled over Montana in earnest now, blanketing Silver Creek in snow that sparkled like diamonds under the pale sun. The ranch work continued feeding cattle, breaking ice on water troughs, repairing fences damaged by the weight of snow. But the rhythm had changed. Sarah was no longer just keeping books. She was an integral part of every decision. One evening, after a particularly long day of sorting through contracts for the spring cattle drive, Sarah found herself alone with Jake in his study. The children were asleep in the cabin. Maria had retired to her quarters, and the ranch hands were in the bunkhouse. Only the crackle of the fire and the scratch of her pen broke the silence. "You should go home," Jake said from where he sat near the fire, nursing a glass of whiskey. "It's late." "Just one more letter," Sarah replied, but her hand was cramping and her eyes burned from strain. "The buyer in Denver needs confirmation by..." "Sarah," his voice was gentle but firm. "Put the pen down." She looked up to find him standing beside her chair, in the firelight. The angles of his face were softened, and she could see the concern in his eyes. "You're working yourself too hard," he said. "I'm working as hard as necessary." But she set the pen aside, flexing her aching fingers. Jake moved behind her chair. "Here." His hands settled on her shoulders, thumbs pressing into the knots of tension there. Sarah's breath caught. She should pull away, should maintain the careful distance they'd kept since that almost kiss. Instead, she melted under his touch, her head falling forward as he worked out the knots with surprising gentleness. "Where did you learn to do that?" she managed. "My mother used to get headaches. Father would do this for her." His hands stilled for a moment. "They've been gone 10 years now. Fever took them both the same winter." "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "That's why you understand. The loneliness." "Yes." His hands resumed their movement, sliding up to massage her temples, though lately she could barely breathe with him this close. his fingers in her hair. Lately, I haven't felt so alone. Sarah turned in her chair to face him, and found him closer than expected. His hands cupped her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. "Jake," she whispered, part warning, part plea. "Tell me to stop," he said roughly. "Tell me this is wrong, that it's too soon, that you're my employee and I'm taking advantage. Tell me, Sarah, because God knows I can't seem to tell myself." Instead of speaking, Sarah rose from her chair, bringing them even closer. Her hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart under her palms. "I can't tell you any of those things," she admitted, "because I'd be lying. This doesn't feel wrong. Jake, it feels inevitable." He finished, and then his mouth was on hers, gentle at first, as if she might break or flee. Sarah made a soft sound and pressed closer, her arms sliding around his neck. The kiss deepened, months of suppressed longing pouring out between them. Jake's arms came around her, pulling her against him as if he'd been starving for the contact. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Jake rested his forehead against hers, his hands trembling slightly where they held her waist. "Sarah, Shh." She placed a finger against his lips. "Don't apologize. Don't rationalize. Just let us have this moment." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'm not sorry. I've wanted to do that since the day you stood up to me about not being charity case." "Only then," Sarah teased, amazed at her own boldness. "Maybe before," he admitted with a slight smile. "Maybe from the moment you stepped down from that wagon, proud as a queen despite everything you'd lost." The mention of her losses sobered them both. Sarah stepped back, though she didn't go far. "I loved William," she said quietly. "Part of me always will." "I wouldn't respect you if you didn't." Jake's understanding made her heart ache. "He was a good man, a friend. I'm not trying to replace him." "Sarah." "I know." She touched his face, memorizing the feel of stubble under her fingers. "And I'm not looking for a replacement. What I feel for you, it's different. Not better or worse, just different." "What do you feel for me?" His voice was vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. Sarah considered her words carefully. "I feel like I can breathe again, like the world has color after months of gray. I feel—" She paused, then decided on honesty. "I feel like myself again, but also like someone entirely new. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." He caught her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Sarah, I need you to know this isn't just loneliness or proximity. I've been alone a long time, had opportunities to change that. This is different," she finished for him. "Different," he agreed. They stood there in the firelight, hands clasped, neither willing to break the spell. "Finally," Sarah sighed. "I should go. The children—" "Of course." But he didn't release her hand immediately. "Sarah, what happens now?" It was a fair question. They'd crossed a line, acknowledged feelings that complicated everything. She was still his employee, still dependent on him for shelter and income. The power imbalance troubled her practical nature. "I don't know," she admitted. "We take it slowly, day by day." "I can do slow," Jake said, though the heat in his eyes suggested otherwise. "But I won't pretend this didn't happen. I won't go back to polite distance." "I don't want that either." She squeezed his hand once more, then stepped away. "Good night, Jake." "Let me walk you back." They bundled into coats and stepped out into the cold night. The snow crunched under their boots, and their breath made clouds in the frigid air. Jake insisted on carrying her lamp, and Sarah tucked her hand into the crook of his elbow, marveling at how natural it felt. At the cabin door, he set down the lamp and turned to her. "Sarah, there's something else. The men, they talk. If this becomes something more, It could affect your reputation. Sarah laughed softly. Jake, I'm a widow with 2 children working on a ranch. My reputation is already a topic of discussion. I decided months ago that survival was more important than propriety. Still, I'm a grown woman, she interrupted gently. I know my own mind and heart. Whatever happens between us, it's my choice. Our choice. He studied her in the lamplight, then nodded. Our choice, he repeated. I like the sound of that. Unable to resist, he leaned down and kissed her again, a gentle press of lips that promised rather than demanded. Sarah sighed into it, allowing herself this moment of sweetness before the realities of tomorrow intruded. Good night, Jake, she whispered against his mouth. Good night, Sarah. Inside the cabin, Sarah leaned against the closed door, fingers pressed to her lips. She could still taste him, still feel the warmth of his hands. Her wedding ring, which she wore on a chain around her neck now, pressed against her chest, a reminder of the past and a question about the future. Mama, Emma's sleepy voice called from the bedroom. Are you home? Yes, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. Sarah prepared for bed quietly, her mind spinning. Everything had changed tonight, and yet nothing had. Tomorrow, she would still rise before dawn, still work on the ledgers, still be the widow McConnell who worked for Jake Morrison. But now she was also the woman Jake Morrison had kissed like a man starved for love. The woman who had kissed him back with equal fervor. The woman who was falling in love despite every practical reason not to. As she lay in her narrow bed, Sarah stared at the ceiling and wondered what William would think. She'd loved her husband truly, but theirs had been a quiet love, born of friendship and shared purpose. What she felt for Jake was something wilder, more consuming, like the Montana wind that scoured the plains and reshaped the landscape. The next morning brought a new challenge. Sarah arrived at the main house to find Jake deep in conversation with a stranger, a well-dressed man who looked distinctly out of place in the rustic setting. Ah, Mrs. McConnell, Jake said, his expression carefully neutral. This is Mr. Harrison from the Territorial Bank. He's here about the loan. Sarah's stomach dropped. They'd made the payment. She was sure of it. She'd sent it herself 2 weeks ago. Mr. Harrison, she said politely, though her mind was already racing through possibilities. Mrs. McConnell. The banker's smile was oily. I was just explaining to Mr. Morrison that there's been a change in bank policy. Given the uncertain cattle prices and the harsh winter, we're calling in several loans early, full payment by month's end, or we begin foreclosure proceedings. That's 3 weeks, Jake said, his voice dangerously quiet. The loan terms clearly state, the terms also include a clause about bank discretion in unstable markets. Harrison interrupted smoothly. I'm sure Mrs. McConnell can show you the relevant passage. Sarah moved to the desk, pulling out the loan documents with hands that wanted to tremble. She found the clause buried in dense legal language she'd glossed over before. Her heart sank. How much? She asked. Full balance, $800. It might as well have been $8,000. They had perhaps $300 in reserve after the recent payment. The cattle wouldn't be ready for market for another month at least. I'll need to review our options. Jake said, you'll have our response within the week. After Harrison left, Jake slammed his fist on the desk, making Sarah jump. Damn vultures! They know we can't raise that money in 3 weeks. There might be a way, Sarah said slowly, her mind working. The horses, you have 20 head that are sale ready. If we can find buyers quickly. In the dead of winter, who's buying horses now? The army, Sarah said. Fort Ellis always needs remounts, and... She hesitated, then forged ahead. I heard in town that the Hartwell Ranch is looking for breeding stock. Jake's expression darkened at the mention of the Hartwell name. I won't go begging to Victoria Hartwell. Victoria. Sarah had heard the name whispered among the ranch hands. Jake's former fiancée, daughter of the richest rancher in 3 counties, the woman who'd broken their engagement when Jake refused to merge the ranches under her father's control. "It's not begging," Sarah said carefully. "It's business, and it might be our only chance." Jake turned away, staring out the window at the snow-covered landscape. Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the pride warring with practicality. "Jake," she moved to stand beside him. "I know this is hard, but Silver Creek is worth more than pride." He turned to her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her heart clench. "Is it? Sometimes I wonder if I'm just postponing the inevitable. Maybe I should have taken Victoria's offer years ago. At least then." "Then you wouldn't be the man you are," Sarah finished firmly. "The man who builds something with his own hands, who treats his workers fairly, who took in a desperate widow and her children without question. That man is worth a dozen Hartwells." Jake pulled her against him suddenly, burying his face in her hair. "What would I do without you?" he murmured. "You won't have to find out," Sarah promised, holding him tight. "We'll figure this out, together." Outside, the wind howled across the plains, bringing more snow, but inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah and Jake found warmth and strength. Whatever came next, Victoria Hartwell, the bank, the uncertain future, they would face it together. The thought should have terrified Sarah. Instead, it filled her with fierce determination. She'd already lost one life, one love, one home. She wouldn't lose another without a fight. And if that meant confronting Jake's past and her own fears, so be it. Love, she was learning, was worth the risk. The Hartwell Ranch sprawled across the valley like a small kingdom, its buildings pristine white against the winter landscape. Sarah sat beside Jake in the wagon, her hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. She'd insisted on coming despite his protests, knowing her presence might soften the business edge of this desperate visit. "Remember," she said quietly as they approached the main house, "this is just business." Jake's jaw was tight. "Tell that to Victoria." As if summoned by her name, Victoria Hartwell emerged onto the wraparound porch, resplendent in a velvet dress that probably cost more than Sarah had seen in her lifetime. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed despite the wind, her smile sharp as winter ice. "Jake Morrison," she called out, her voice carrying that particular note of possession that set Sarah's teeth on edge. What a delightful surprise. They climbed down from the wagon, Jake helping Sarah with careful courtesy that didn't go unnoticed by their hostess. "Miss Hartwell," Jake said formally. "This is Mrs. McConnell, my bookkeeper." Victoria's blue eyes swept over Sarah dismissively. "The widow? Yes, I've heard. How charitable of you, Jake." She turned her attention fully to him. "Come in from the cold. Father's in his study." The Hartwell house was everything Silver Creek wasn't opulent, decorated with imported furniture and crystal chandeliers that seemed absurd in the Montana territory. Sarah felt acutely aware of her worn dress and practical boots. "I'll have tea brought to the parlor for your assistant," Victoria said, the pause deliberate. "Mrs. McConnell will join us for the business discussion," Jake said firmly. "She handles all my negotiations now." Victoria's perfect smile faltered slightly. How modern. Very well. Colonel Hartwell, Victoria's father, was a bear of a man with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Jake's proposal, 20 head of prime horses at a fair price, with an expression that gave nothing away. "Good stock," he admitted after Jake finished. "But winter's a bad time to buy. I could perhaps take 10 head at 60% of your asking price." Sarah had remained silent until now, but this was too much. "With respect, Colonel Hartwell, these horses are worth full price even in a blizzard. The bloodlines alone." "Are you questioning my judgment, young woman?" The colonel's voice was cold. "I'm stating facts," Sarah replied calmly, pulling out the breeding records she'd brought. "Sired by Midnight Thunder out of Silver Bell, With race winners in their ancestry, the Army paid full price for similar stock just last month. Then sell to the Army. The Army needs working mounts. These are breeding stock, and you know it. Sarah met his gaze steadily. 75% of asking price for all 20 head, and that's generous considering their quality. The colonel leaned back, studying her with new interest. You've done your homework, Mrs. McConnell. It's my job to know the value of Silver Creek's assets. Among other things, I'm sure, Victoria interjected, her meaning clear. Sarah felt Jake tense beside her, but placed a calming hand on his arm. Yes, among other things, including keeping accurate books, managing correspondence, and ensuring the ranch runs smoothly. All perfectly respectable employment for a widow with children to support. How admirable. Victoria's voice dripped condescension. Though I wonder what your late husband would think of your dedication to your employer. The words hit their mark. But Sarah had faced worse. I believe William would be grateful that his friend provided honest work and shelter for his family, just as any decent man would. Enough, Jake said, his voice low and dangerous. Colonel, do we have a deal or not? The older man was watching the interplay with amusement. 70% for all 20, final offer. And I want first pick of next year's foals. Sarah did quick calculations. It wasn't enough to cover the full loan. But with the Army contracts and tight management. Deal, she said before Jake could refuse out of pride. Papers were drawn up and signed with tense efficiency. As they prepared to leave, Victoria caught Jake's arm. Stay for dinner, she said, her voice suddenly soft, vulnerable. For old time's sake. We need to get back, Jake said, but his voice was gentler than before. The storm's coming in. There's always a storm coming in, Victoria replied, and for a moment, Sarah saw past the perfect facade to something almost sad. You can't run from the past forever, Jake. I'm not running from anything, Jake said, looking directly at Sarah as he spoke. I'm moving toward something better. Victoria's gaze followed his, and her expression hardened again. We'll see. Some things, Jake Morrison, are inevitable. The ride back to Silver Creek was silent, except for the wind and the creak of wagon wheels. Sarah could feel the tension radiating from Jake, the ghosts of his past sitting between them like unwelcome passengers. Thank you, he said finally as the ranch came into view, for handling the negotiation, for keeping your composure when Victoria, Sarah finished. I've dealt with worse. Jake, small towns are full of women who think they own men they gave up. She didn't give me up. I walked away. Why? The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it. Jake was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because she wanted to own me, merge the ranches. Yes, but under her father's control. I'd have been a figurehead, a pretty ornament at her side while the colonel ran everything. She couldn't understand why that mattered to me. Pride, Sarah asked gently. Purpose, Jake corrected. A man needs to build something of his own. Sarah needs to know his sweat and blood went into something that matters. Otherwise, what's the point? Sarah thought of William, of the farm they'd built together, of the pride in his eyes when he looked over their small but thriving operation. I understand. I know you do. He reached over and took her hand. That's one of the many reasons why... He didn't finish, but Sarah heard the unspoken words. One of the many reasons why I'm falling in love with you. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. The horses were delivered to the Hartwell Ranch, the payment collected. Sarah negotiated contracts with Fort Ellis for beef and remounts, squeezing every penny possible from each deal. Jake and the men worked tirelessly despite the worsening weather, preparing cattle for early sale. But it wasn't enough. 2 days before the bank deadline, they were still $200 short. We could sell some of the breeding cows, Sam suggested during a tense meeting in Jake's study. That's cutting our future for a present problem. Jake said. Better than losing everything, Miguel countered. Sarah stared at the ledgers, willing the numbers to change. There had to be something they'd missed, some asset they hadn't considered. The furniture, she said suddenly. The pieces in the guest rooms, the extra tack, the… No, Jake's voice was firm. We're not selling furniture like some desperate… We are desperate, Sarah interrupted. And furniture can be replaced, Silver Creek can't. Maria, who'd been quietly serving coffee, spoke up. The senora is right. What good is a fine table with no roof over it? Over the next day, Sarah organized the most efficient estate sale the territory had ever seen. Everything non-essential was cataloged, priced, and word spread to town. Neighbors came, some to buy, others just to gawk. Sarah endured the humiliation with her head high, charming buyers and negotiating prices with desperate skill. Victoria Hartwell arrived in the afternoon, her presence causing a stir among the other buyers. How enterprising, she said, fingering a silver brush that had belonged to Jake's mother. Though I must say, it's rather sad to see Silver Creek reduced to this. Silver Creek isn't reduced to anything, Sarah replied evenly. We're simply being practical. Would you like to buy something, Miss Hartwell? Or are you just browsing? Victoria's smile was sharp. Oh, I'll buy something. A memento of Jake's pride, perhaps. She picked up the silver brush. I'll take this, and that mirror, and… Her gaze swept the room and landed on a small painting of the ranch. That. She overpaid significantly, and Sarah knew it was a calculated move charity disguised as purchase, meant to establish superiority, but they needed the money too badly to refuse. Thank you for your business, Sarah said, wrapping the items carefully. You're welcome. Victoria leaned in closer, her voice dropping. Enjoy this while it lasts. Mrs. McConnell. Jake always did have a weakness for charity cases, but when the novelty wears off, when he remembers what real partnership looks like… She straightened, smile bright. Well, we'll see. Sarah's hands clenched, but she kept her voice steady. Yes, we will see. Have a safe journey home. Miss Hartwell, the storms can be so unpredictable this time of year. After Victoria left, Sarah found herself shaking, not from fear or anger, but from the effort of restraint. She wanted to throw something, to scream, to… Sarah, Jake appeared in the doorway, taking in her expression. What did she say? Nothing that matters. Sarah forced herself to relax. She bought 3 items, overpaid considerably. Jake crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. You're trembling. I'm fine. Liar. His thumb stroked her cheekbones. Sarah, whatever she said I was a novelty, a charity case you'll tire of. Jake's expression darkened. She's wrong. I know. And surprisingly, Sarah found she did know. The certainty of it, of him, steadied her. I know, Jake. He kissed her then, right there in the parlor with people milling outside, with the evidence of their desperation scattered around them. It was a claiming kiss, a promise, a declaration that left her breathless. You're not a charity case, he said against her lips. You're my salvation, my partner, my… Jake, Mrs. McConnell! Sam burst in, face flushed with cold and excitement. Telegram from Fort Ellis. They want double the beef order, full payment on delivery. Sarah snatched the telegram, reading quickly. The numbers swam before her eyes, then crystallized into beautiful clarity. This covers everything. The loan, the operating expenses, everything. The colonel must have put in a good word. Sam said, message says they heard we had quality stock at fair prices. Jake looked stunned. Hartwell, why would he? Because he's a businessman. Sarah said slowly, and I proved we were worth investing in. He might not like you personally, Jake, but he respects a good deal. That night, they celebrated quietly. The children were allowed to stay up late, eating Maria's special honey cakes by the fire. The ranch hands stopped by to share a drink and their relief. The bank deadline would be met. Silver Creek would survive. Later, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Sarah stood on the porch despite the cold, too energized to rest. Jake found her there, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "We did it," she said softly. "You did it," he corrected. "The negotiating, the sale, managing Victoria." "We did it," Sarah insisted, turning in his arms. "Together." Jake studied her in the moonlight, his expression serious. "Sarah, about what Victoria said." "Doesn't matter." "It does, because she was wrong about everything except one thing. This isn't a novelty for me. It's not charity or convenience or loneliness. I need you to know that." Sarah's heart pounded. "Jake." "I'm in love with you," he said simply. "Completely, desperately, permanently in love with you. And I know it's too soon. Know you're still grieving. Know there are a dozen reasons why." Sarah silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her feelings into the contact. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. "I love you too," she whispered. "It terrifies me, but I do." Jake's smile was radiant. "Terrified together, then—" "Together," Sarah agreed. In the distance, a wolf howled, and the wind carried the promise of more snow. But wrapped in Jake's arms, Sarah felt only warmth. Silver Creek was saved. The children were safe. And against all odds, she'd found love again. The future stretched before them, uncertain as always in this harsh land. But for the first time since William's death, Sarah faced it with hope rather than mere determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Victoria Hartwell wasn't done, that much was clear. The ranch still operated on thin margins, and Sarah's heart still carried scars that might never fully heal. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, there was only Jake's arms around her, the vast Montana sky above them, and the quiet certainty that somehow they would face whatever came. Together, the blizzard struck without warning 3 days after Christmas, transforming the Montana landscape into a howling white void. Sarah pressed her face against the frosted window of the main house, watching the ranch hands struggle to secure the barn doors against the screaming wind. "They should come inside," she said, anxiety threading through her voice. "They know what they're doing," Jake replied, but she could see the tension in his shoulders as he pulled on his heavy coat. "The cattle in the near pasture need to be driven to shelter. If we lose them—" He didn't need to finish. They'd met the bank payment, but their reserves were thin. Losing even a portion of the herd would be catastrophic. "I'm coming with you," Sarah said, already reaching for her coat. "Absolutely not." Jake's voice was firm. "This isn't a normal storm. Sarah, it's a killer." "Which is exactly why you need every hand available." She met his gaze steadily. "I can ride. I can help." "Sarah, don't—" She buttoned her coat with determined fingers. "Don't treat me like a fragile flower now. Jake Morrison. Not after everything we've been through." Maria entered from the kitchen, her face creased with worry. "The children, Senora, they are frightened." Sarah's determination wavered. Emma and Tommy were at the cabin with one of the younger ranch hands' wives watching them. But in a storm like this— "Go to them," Jake said, his voice gentler. "They need their mother." It was the right thing to do, the sensible thing. But as Sarah watched Jake head into the storm with his men, something cold clutched at her heart. She'd lost one husband to the harsh realities of frontier life. The thought of losing Jake— She pushed the fear down and made her way to the cabin, fighting against wind that tried to throw her to the ground. Inside, she found Emma and Tommy huddled together near the stove, the young woman watching them pale with fear. "Thank you. Betty, I'll take over now," Sarah said, sending the girl to join her husband in the bunkhouse. "Mama, where's Mr. Jake?" Tommy asked, his small face pinched with worry. "Helping with the cattle," Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain calm. "He'll be fine. Now, who wants to hear a story?" She spent the next hours distracting the children, telling tales and playing quiet games, all while straining to hear anything over the storm's fury. The wind shook the cabin walls, snow piling against the windows until they were nearly buried. It was full dark when she heard the shouting. "Stay here," she ordered the children, grabbing her coat. "Do not leave this cabin." Outside, the world had transformed into chaos. Snow flew horizontally, biting at any exposed skin. Sarah could barely see 3 feet ahead, but she followed the voices, stumbling through drifts that reached her thighs. She found them by the barn, Jake in 3 hands supporting a 4th man who sagged between them. Even in the dim light spilling from the barn, she could see the blood on the snow. "What happened?" she shouted over the wind. "A tree branch came down," Sam yelled back. "Caught Ben across the head and shoulder." They got the injured man inside the barn, laying him on a bed of hay. Sarah knelt beside him, her hands already assessing the damage. A gash along his temple bled freely, and his left arm hung at a wrong angle. "Dislocated shoulder," she said. "And this cut needs stitching. Get me clean cloth, whiskey, and a needle and thread from my sewing kit in the house." "Sarah, the storm," Jake started. "We'll have to wait." She pressed a folded cloth against Ben's head wound. "This can't—" For the next hour, Sarah worked with steady hands, cleaning and stitching the gash while the men held lanterns close. The shoulder was trickier. It took Jake and Miguel's combined strength to hold Ben steady while she manipulated the joint back into place. "Where did you learn this?" Miguel asked, awe in his voice as she tied off the last bandage. "My father was a doctor," Sarah said, something she rarely mentioned. "Before he died, he taught me what he could, said frontier women needed to know more than embroidery." Ben was conscious now, groggy but grateful. They made him comfortable in the barn's tack room with blankets and a small stove. Moving him to the bunkhouse was impossible in the storm. "The cattle?" Sarah asked as they caught their breath. "Most are secure," Jake said, but his expression was grim. "We're still missing about 30 head from the north pasture, including Duchess and her calf." Duchess was one of their best breeding cows, worth more than they could afford to lose. Sarah saw the defeat in Jake's eyes, the weight of impending loss. "The storm might break by morning," she said. "They could have found shelter in the coulees." Maybe. He didn't sound hopeful. The journey back to the main house was treacherous. Jake kept one arm around Sarah, using his body to shield her from the worst of the wind. Halfway there, she stumbled, and he swept her up into his arms without hesitation. "Jake, put me down. You'll throw out your back." "Hush," he said against her ear. "Let me take care of you for once." Inside, Maria had hot soup waiting and blankets warming by the fire. Sarah wanted to check on the children, but Jake wouldn't let her leave until she'd eaten and warmed through. "They're safe," he said. "Betty's husband Tom is watching the cabin. You can't help them if you catch your death." It was near midnight when the worst of the storm hit. The house shook under the assault, windows rattling in their frames. The fire flickered as wind found every tiny gap in the walls. "I've never seen it this bad," Jake admitted, standing by the window, though there was nothing to see but white. Sarah joined him, slipping her hand into his. "We'll get through it." "Will we?" His voice was raw. "Sometimes I wonder if this land is trying to tell me something. First the drought, then the bank, now this. Maybe I'm not meant to—" "Stop!" Sarah turned him to face her. "This land tests everyone. Jake, it tested me when William died, when I lost the farm, when I had to swallow my pride and ask for work, but we're still here, still fighting." "Together," he said softly. "Together." He pulled her against him, and they stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other while the storm raged outside. Sarah, he said against her hair, if something happens to me, nothing will happen. But if it does, promise me you'll take the children and go somewhere safe. San Francisco. Maybe, or... She silenced him with a kiss, fierce and desperate. Nothing will happen, she repeated when they parted. Because I won't let it. We've come too far. Jake Morrison fought too hard. I won't lose you to a storm or anything else. His arms tightened around her. God, I love you. Show me, she whispered, surprising herself with her boldness. Jake pulled back to search her face. Sarah, are you sure? Instead of answering, she took his hand and led him to the sofa by the fire. The storm had stripped away pretense, leaving only essential truths. Life was fragile. Tomorrow was uncertain. But this moment, this man, this love, these were real and present and hers. Their coming together was tender and passionate by turns, a claiming and a promise combined. Afterward, they lay entwined on the sofa, covered by a quilt Maria had thoughtfully left, watching the fire while the storm spent its fury outside. I should check on the children, Sarah murmured, though she made no move to leave Jake's arms. Soon, he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. But not yet. They dozed fitfully, waking when the wind would surge with renewed violence. Near dawn, Jake rose to add wood to the fire, and Sarah watched him in the dim light, the strong lines of his body, the grace in his movements, the way he looked at her with such open adoration when he returned to her side. The wind's dying, he said. We'll be able to get out soon. Reality intruded with his words. There would be damage to assess, cattle to find, repairs to make. But for now, Sarah pulled him back down beside her. Not yet, she echoed his earlier words. Just not yet. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, it revealed a world transformed. Drifts reached the eaves of some buildings. Fences had vanished under the snow, but Silver Creek had survived. The reunion with the children was tearful and joyous. They'd weathered the storm with the resilience of youth, turning it into an adventure. Sarah held them close, breathing in their familiar scent, grateful beyond words for their safety. The search for the missing cattle began immediately. Jake and the hands spread out across the white landscape, looking for any sign of the lost animals. Sarah coordinated from the house, preparing hot food and medical supplies for when they returned. It was late afternoon when Jake rode in, his face bright with unexpected joy. Behind him, Sam and Miguel herded the missing cattle, including Duchess and her calf. They found shelter in Widow's Coulee, Jake explained, dismounting stiffly. The old dugout there saved them. Sarah threw her arms around him, not caring who saw. All of them. All but 2 yearlings. Better than I dared hope. The relief was palpable as the ranch slowly returned to normal. Ben was recovering well, already complaining about being confined to bed. The damage to buildings was minimal. Silver Creek had been built to withstand Montana's fury. That evening, as Sarah tucked the children into bed in their cabin, Emma looked up at her with serious eyes. Mama, are you going to marry Mr. Jake? Sarah's breath caught. What makes you ask that, sweetheart? Betty said she saw him kissing you, and Tommy says Mr. Jake looks at you the way Papa used to. Out of the mouths of babes. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. How would you feel if I did, if Mr. Jake became part of our family? Tommy bounced up. Would he be our new Papa? He'd be your stepfather, Sarah corrected gently. No one could replace your Papa, but Jake cares about all of us very much. I like Mr. Jake, Emma said after a moment. He's teaching me to rope, and he doesn't laugh when I read him stories. And he said I could have my own horse when I'm bigger, Tommy added. Sarah's heart swelled. So you'd be happy if we became a real family? Both children nodded enthusiastically, and Sarah hugged them tight. Well then, we'll see what happens. Later. She returned to the main house to find Jake in his study, going over the storm damage reports. He looked up as she entered, his face lighting with that smile she'd come to treasure. "How are they?"
"Perfect."
She moved to stand beside his chair.
"They asked if we were getting married."
Jake went very still. "What did you tell them?"
"That we'd see what happens."
He pulled her onto his lap, his arms circling her waist. "And what do you want to happen? Sarah McConnell." She framed his face with her hands, memorizing every line and angle. "I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and work beside you every day. I want to give my children the father they deserve and maybe give them brothers or sisters. I want it all. Jake, with you." His eyes were suspiciously bright.
"Is that a yes?"
"To what?" she teased. "To marrying me. To being my wife, my partner, my everything. To facing whatever storms come. Together." Sarah kissed him softly.
"Yes, to all of it, yes."
Jake's whoop of joy could probably be heard in the bunkhouse, but Sarah didn't care. She was too busy being kissed senseless by the man she loved, too busy planning a future she'd never dared imagine. Outside, the Montana sky stretched clear and infinite, stars beginning to appear in the darkening blue. The storm had passed, leaving Silver Creek stronger for having weathered it, and in the warmth of the main house, two souls who'd found each other against all odds began planning their forever. The news of Jake Morrison's engagement to his widowed bookkeeper spread through the Montana territory like wildfire in dry grass. By the time Sarah rode into town for supplies a week after accepting his proposal, she could feel the weight of curious stares and hear the whisper of gossip following her through the general store. Sarah, Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, approached with a smile sharp as broken glass. "How wonderful to see you. We've heard such interesting news about Silver Creek." "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson." Sarah kept her voice pleasant while selecting fabric for Emma's new dress. "What news would that be?" "Why, your engagement to Mr. Morrison, of course. So sudden. You must be very pleased with your situation." The implication hung heavy between them. Sarah had gone from destitute widow to future mistress of one of the largest ranches in the territory. She met Mrs. Patterson's gaze directly. "I'm pleased to be marrying a good man who treats my children with kindness and respect. The situation, as you call it, is secondary to that." "Of course." Mrs. Patterson's smile never wavered, though one does wonder what poor Victoria Hartwell thinks of it all. She and Jake were so close for so many years. "Were they?" Sarah turned back to the fabrics. "How fortunate that they both found better matches elsewhere, then." She heard Mrs. Patterson's sharp intake of breath, but didn't turn around. Let them gossip. She had more important concerns than the wounded pride of territorial society. At the counter, Mr. Henley tallied her purchases with unusual attention to detail. "That's quite a lot of supplies. Mrs. McConnell, setting up household already. Preparing for spring." Sarah replied evenly. "Ranching doesn't stop for weddings. Mr. Henley." "Indeed not." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You might want to know. Victoria Hartwell was in here yesterday, asking questions about your late husband's debts, your time before coming to Silver Creek." Sarah's hand stilled on her purse. "Was she now?" Seemed mighty interested in whether William left any outstanding obligations, whether there might be complications to your upcoming marriage. Anger flared hot in Sarah's chest, but she tamped it down. "William's debts died with him, Mr. Henley, as you well know, since you held several of his notes yourself, all settled when the farm was sold." "That's what I told her?" The shopkeeper's expression softened slightly. "You're good people. Mrs. McConnell, Jake Morrison's lucky to have you. Don't let the Victoria Hartwells of the world tell you different." Sarah left the store with her head high, but worry gnawed at her during the ride back to Silver Creek. What was Victoria planning? And more importantly, What stones from the past might she overturn in her digging? She found Jake in the corral working with a young stallion, his movements sure and gentle as he guided the animal through its paces. He spotted her and handed the lead to Sam, vaulting the fence with easy grace. How was town? He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist.
Educational.
She glanced around, ensuring they were alone.
Victoria's been asking questions about William's debts.
Jake's expression darkened. Has she now?
Mister, Henley warned me. Jake, what if she finds...
Finds what?
He cupped her face gently. That your husband was human, that he made mistakes trying to provide for his family. There's no shame in that. Sarah.
But if people know about the gambling debts, about why we really lost the farm, then they'll know you survived it with grace and dignity. His thumbs stroked her cheekbones.
You have nothing to be ashamed of.
Nothing. Sarah leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty.
I just don't want to bring scandal to Silver Creek, to you.
The only scandal would be if I let you go. He kissed her forehead. Let Victoria dig. She'll find nothing that changes how I feel about you. That evening, as Sarah helped Maria prepare dinner, Emma burst into the kitchen, eyes wide with excitement. Mama, there's a fancy carriage coming up the road. Sarah's heart sank. She had a good idea who would arrive in a fancy carriage. Victoria Hartwell swept into Silver Creek like a queen granting an audience, resplendent in burgundy silk despite the muddy ranch yard. Behind her, a well-dressed man Sarah didn't recognize carried a leather portfolio.
Jake,
Victoria called out sweetly as he emerged from the house.
How lovely to find you home. And Mrs. McConnell, still hard at work, I see.
Miss Hartwell. Jake's voice was carefully neutral.
To what do we owe the pleasure?
Business, I'm afraid. Victoria's smile was razor sharp. This is Mr. Thornton, my attorney. We've come about a legal matter that concerns Mrs. McConnell. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Jake tensed. Perhaps we should discuss this inside. Mr. Thornton suggested, looking uncomfortable. In Jake's study, the attorney laid out several documents on the desk. Sarah recognized them with a sinking heart promissory notes in William's handwriting. These debts were not listed among William McConnell's obligations at the time of his death. Mr. Thornton explained, they've recently come to light, purchased by my client from their original holder. A Mr. Simon Crawford of Denver, Victoria added helpfully. Perhaps you remember him. Mrs. McConnell. Your husband did quite a bit of business with him. Sarah remembered. Crawford ran high-stakes card games, the kind William had sworn he'd never visit again after each loss. These notes total $800, Thornton continued. As Mr. McConnell's widow, you inherit both his assets and his obligations.
She inherited nothing but debt,
Jake said coldly. The farm and all assets were seized by creditors.
Ah, but she inherited something quite valuable recently, didn't she?
Victoria's eyes glittered.
An engagement to a prosperous rancher. These debts become marital property upon marriage.
Mr. Morrison, your property. The trap was elegantly sprung. Sarah saw it now. Victoria couldn't have Jake, so she'd ensure no one else could either, or at least, not without a price. How convenient that these notes surfaced now. Jake observed, one might almost think it was planned. Business is business, Victoria replied, though I might be persuaded to forgive the debt under certain conditions, which are, break the engagement, send Mrs. McConnell away, return things to how they should be. The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah found her voice first. No. Victoria blinked. I beg your pardon.
No.
Sarah stood, drawing on every ounce of steel in her spine.
I won't run. I won't hide. And I certainly won't let you manipulate us with paper and threats.
It's not a threat. Mrs.
McConnell, it's legal fact. These debts were gambling obligations. Sarah met the attorney's eyes. Texas law is quite clear about gambling debts. Mr. Thornton, they're legally uncollectible. You know this, of course. The attorney shifted uncomfortably. That's a gray area. It's not gray at all. Sarah pulled a book from Jake's shelf, one she'd studied carefully weeks ago when organizing his library. Prescott versus Coleman, 1863. The Texas Supreme Court ruled gambling debts null and void, regardless of how they're disguised. We're not in Texas, Victoria snapped. No, but Mr. Crawford is. The debts were incurred there, which means Texas law applies. Sarah turned to the attorney. You knew this was unenforceable. You counted on my ignorance or my fear. You miscalculated on both counts. Mr. Thornton gathered his papers hastily. I'll need to research the applicable statutes. You do that. Jake stood, moving to stand beside Sarah. And while you're at it, research harassment laws, and slander, and attempted extortion. Victoria's perfect composure finally cracked. Jake, you can't be serious. This woman is going to be my wife, Jake said firmly. And you're going to leave her alone. Victoria, whatever we might have had ended years ago when you tried to buy me like a prize bull. This petty revenge helps no one. Petty, Victoria's voice rose. You think my feelings are petty? For the first time, Sarah saw real pain in the other woman's eyes. Despite everything, she felt a twinge of sympathy. I think you're hurt, Sarah said quietly. And I'm sorry for that. But trying to destroy what Jake and I have won't heal your pain. It'll only create more. Victoria stared at her for a long moment. You think you've won, the poor widow with her sad children and her noble suffering. But you don't know him like I do. Jake Morrison doesn't do half measures. He'll consume you, remake you, until you don't know where you end and he begins. And when that happens, when you've lost yourself completely, remember that I warned you. She swept out with as much dignity as she could muster, her attorney scrambling to follow. Jake and Sarah stood in silence until they heard the carriage roll away. Well, Jake said finally. That was interesting. Sarah sank into a chair, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation suddenly deserting her. The debts were real. William, he promised he'd stopped, but those last months, when the drought hit and we knew we'd lose everything, he tried to win it back at the tables. Jake knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. Sarah, I don't care. You should. Victoria was right about one thing, marry me, and any legitimate debts become yours too. Then we'll face them together. He squeezed her hands. Though after that legal display, I doubt anyone will try to collect. Where did you learn that? Despite everything, Sarah smiled. I've been reading your law books. Maria says I have too much time on my hands if I'm reading such dry material for pleasure. Jake laughed, the sound washing away the tension. Remind me never to oppose you in court, or anywhere else for that matter. Jake! Sarah sobered. What Victoria said about you consuming people. Was there truth in that? He considered the question seriously. I'm not an easy man. Sarah, I demand everything complete honesty, complete partnership, complete commitment. Victoria wanted to own me, but she also wanted to keep parts of herself separate, sacred. Her father's approval, her social standing, her idea of what our life should be. She was right that I don't do half measures. And you think I do? I think, he said carefully, that you've already given everything to this ranch, to this life, to us. Not because I demanded it, but because that's who you are. We match, Sarah, in intensity, in commitment, in the way we love. That's why this works. Sarah touched his face. So when you consume me, I'll be consuming you right back. God, I hope so. She kissed him then, pouring all her love and fear and determination into the contact. When they parted, both were breathless. No more secrets, she said. No more shame about the past. We face everything together from now on.
Everything, Jake agreed. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah found herself standing in the doorway of the cabin that had been her refuge these past months. Tomorrow, she would begin moving her things to the main house. The wedding was set for next week, a simple ceremony with just family and close friends. Nothing like the grand affair Victoria had probably planned during her years of waiting. Second thoughts. Jake appeared beside her. Having followed her from the house.
No, just remembering.
She leaned into him.
When I first came here, I was so broken, so determined never to depend on anyone again.
And now I know there's a difference between dependence and partnership, between needing someone and choosing them. She turned in his arms.
I choose you, Jake Morrison, every day for whatever comes.
And I choose you, Sarah McConnell, soon to be Morrison, forever and always. Above them, the Montana stars shone bright and constant, witnesses to promises made and kept. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would always be those who questioned their love, who saw calculation where there was only truth. But tonight, they had each other and the certainty that whatever storms came, they would weather them as they had all the others. Together. Tommy's voice called from inside the cabin.
Mama, I can't sleep. Will you tell us about when Papa Jake taught you to ride?
Papa Jake, Sarah raised an eyebrow at her soon-to-be husband. Jake grinned, unrepentant. The boy asked if he could call me that. How could I say no?
You can't say no to either of them,
Sarah accused fondly.
They have you wrapped around their little fingers.
All three of you do, Jake admitted. And I wouldn't have it any other way. As they went inside to settle Tommy, Sarah marveled at how much had changed since that desperate autumn day when she'd arrived at Silver Creek. She'd thought she was just seeking shelter, a job, a way to survive. Instead, she'd found a home, a partner, and a love she hadn't believed possible. Victoria had been wrong about one thing. Loving Jake Morrison hadn't diminished her. It had revealed strength she didn't know she possessed, depths of courage and passion and joy she'd thought buried with William. Tomorrow, she would face down any lingering gossip with her head high. Next week, she would marry the man she loved, surrounded by people who truly mattered. And every day after that, she would build a life of purpose and meaning on this unforgiving, beautiful land. The widow McConnell was gone. In her place stood Sarah Morrison-to-be, partner, mother, and soon-to-be wife, ready for whatever came next. Ready for everything. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline Montana sky that made the mountains look close enough to touch. Sarah stood before the mirror in what had been Jake's mother's room, now hers, while Maria fastened the buttons on her dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory silk that Mrs. Patterson had grudgingly admitted was quite appropriate for a second wedding.
Mama, you look like a princess,
Emma breathed from the doorway, already dressed in her new blue frock. A real pretty one, Tommy added, fidgeting with his collar.
Papa Jake's gonna fall right over when he sees you.
Sarah's heart swelled at how naturally they'd taken to calling Jake Papa Jake. It had been his suggestion that they save Papa alone for William's memory, and the children had embraced the distinction with the wisdom that sometimes comes naturally to the young.
Stand still, mijo,
Maria scolded Tommy gently, fixing his collar. You want to look handsome for your mama's wedding? No. Through the window, Sarah could see guests beginning to arrive. The ceremony would be held in the main room of the house, decorated with early spring wildflowers that Emma and Maria had gathered yesterday. It was simple, intimate, nothing like the grand affair Victoria Hartwell had likely envisioned for herself. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts.
Sarah,
Sam's voice called.
Jake sent me to tell you the preacher's here.
We're ready when you are.
Almost,
Sarah called back, her voice steadier than her hands. Maria squeezed her shoulders.
You are nervous, Senora.
Terrified, Sarah admitted,
Not of Jake, not of marriage, but what if I'm not enough? What if I can't be the partner he needs? Ay, menina. Maria turned her to face the mirror. Look at yourself. You have survived loss, poverty, shame. You have protected your children, saved this ranch, faced down that terrible Hartwell woman. You are more than enough. You are everything. Sarah blinked back tears, not wanting to spoil the small amount of rouge Maria had insisted on applying. Thank you for everything these months. De nada. Now come, your man is waiting. The walk downstairs felt both endless and too quick. Sarah could hear the murmur of voices, the scrape of chairs being arranged. Then Emma opened the door to the main room, and all sound ceased. Jake stood before the fireplace in his best suit, the preacher beside him. But Sarah had eyes only for her soon-to-be husband. The look on his face when he saw her wonder and love and something close to reverence made every fear evaporate. She walked toward him on steady feet, Tommy on one side and Emma on the other. It felt right, approaching this new life with her children beside her, not being given away but choosing her own path. Dearly beloved, Reverend Thompson began when they reached the front. We gather today to witness the union of Jake Morrison and Sarah McConnell, and the forming of a new family. The words washed over Sarah in a warm wave. She was aware of Jake's hand holding hers, of the children standing proudly beside them, of friends smiling from their chairs. Sam stood as Jake's best man, trying not to cry. Miguel and the other ranch hands filled the back of the room, scrubbed and polished in their Sunday best. The couple has written their own vows, the Reverend said, and Sarah's attention snapped back. Jake squeezed her hand and began, his voice strong and clear. Sarah, you came to Silver Creek seeking shelter, and instead gave me a home. You asked for work and became my partner. You offered competence and brought salvation. I promised to love you with the wild devotion of this untamed land. I promised to stand beside you through blizzards and droughts, through prosperity and hardship. I promised to be a father to Emma and Tommy, to honor William's memory by raising them with love and strength. I promised to spend every day earning the gift of your love. You are my heart, my anchor, my forever. Sarah had to swallow twice before she could speak. Jake, you gave me refuge when I had nothing left to give. You showed me that strength could be gentle, that walls built from pain could be torn down by patient love. I promise to match your devotion with my own, as fierce and enduring as the mountains that watch over us. I promise to be your partner in all things in running this ranch, in building our family, in facing whatever comes. I promise to love you with everything I am and everything I'm yet to become. You are my choice, my joy, my home. The rings, Reverend Thompson prompted. Tommy stepped forward proudly with the simple gold bands. As Jake slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, he whispered the words that had started it all. Don't you dare stop. Sarah's breath caught, remembering that night by the fire when he'd first said those words, when she'd been tending his injured shoulder and their careful friendship had transformed into something deeper. I won't, she whispered back. Never. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was sweet and full of promise, interrupted only by Tommy's enthusiastic hooray and the cheers from their assembled friends. The celebration that followed was perfect in its simplicity. Maria had outdone herself with the food. The ranch hands had decorated the barn for dancing, and someone had brought a fiddle. Sarah found herself swept from one well-wisher to another, accepting congratulations and good-natured teasing with equal grace. Never thought I'd see the day Jake Morrison got leg shackled. Old Ben said, fully recovered from his storm injuries. But if anyone could manage it, it'd be you, Mrs. Morrison. Mrs. Morrison. The name felt strange and right all at once. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Jake found her on the porch, taking a moment of quiet. Escaping already, he teased. wrapping his arms around her from behind. Never. She leaned back against him, just thinking. About how different my life is from what I imagined a year ago. About William, and whether he'd approve. About the future. Jake was quiet for a moment. I think William would be glad his family is safe and loved. He was a practical man, he'd understand. He would. Sarah agreed. He told me once that if anything happened to him, I should find happiness wherever I could. I just never imagined. That happiness would be with his cantankerous friend who can barely keep his own books. Sarah laughed, turning in his arms. That happiness would be so complete. I loved William truly, but this, Jake, I feel like I'm finally who I was meant to be. Sarah Morrison, he said, testing the name. It suits you. Everything about this life suits me, even the hard parts. They were interrupted by Emma and Tommy racing onto the porch. Mama, Papa, Jake, they're calling for you to dance. Jake swept Sarah into the barn where lanterns cast a warm glow, and the fiddle player was tuning up for a waltz. As they took the floor, their friends and family forming a circle around them, Sarah felt the last of her old life slip away like an outgrown skin. The dance was perfect. Jake's strong arms guiding her, the music washing over them, their children clapping along with the rhythm. When other couples joined them on the floor, Sarah saw her new life reflected in their faces, the respect in Sam's eyes, the warm approval in Maria's smile, the acceptance from the community that had once whispered about the widow who'd captured Jake Morrison. Later, much later, after the guests had gone home and the children were tucked into their beds in the main house, Sarah stood with Jake on the porch, wrapped in a quilt against the cool night air. No regrets, Jake asked. None. Sarah looked up at the vast canopy of stars. I used to think my story ended when William died, that everything after was just surviving for the children's sake. But now I know that was just the end of a chapter. And this is the beginning of the next one. The best one, she confirmed, rising on her toes to kiss him. They stood there for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the night sounds of the ranch that was now truly theirs together. In the barn, horses nickered softly. From the bunkhouse came the low murmur of the hands settling for the night. The wind carried the scent of sage and the promise of spring. What are you thinking? Jake asked eventually. Sarah smiled, remembering a similar question on another night that had changed everything. I'm thinking that I'm exactly where I belong, with who I belong with, forever. Forever, Jake agreed, and sealed the promise with another kiss, as they finally went inside to begin their married life. Sarah paused at the threshold to look back at the land that had tested her, broken her, and ultimately remade her. The moon hung low over the mountains, bathing Silver Creek Ranch in silver light. Their ranch, their home, their future. She'd come to Montana as a desperate widow seeking shelter. She'd found so much more love, purpose, family, and a strength she never knew she possessed. The journey had been hard, filled with loss and struggle and moments when she thought she couldn't go on. But she had gone on. They had gone on, together. And now, as Mrs. Sarah Morrison, partner in all things, mother, wife, and woman of the frontier, she was ready for whatever came next. The land would test them again, it always did. There would be droughts and storms, struggles and triumphs, tears and laughter. But there would also be this Jake's hand in hers, their children safe under their roof, their love as enduring as the mountains themselves. Coming to bed, Mrs. Morrison, Jake called softly from inside. Always, she answered, and stepped through the doorway into their future. Under the vast Montana sky, Silver Creek Ranch settled into peaceful slumber, its inhabitants safe in the knowledge that come what may, they would face it as they always had, with courage, determination, and unshakable love. The story of the widow and the rancher had ended. The story of the Morrison family had just begun.
And somewhere in the star-filled darkness, perhaps William McConnell smiled, knowing his family had found their way home at last. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Sarah and Jake's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this story. Please leave a comment below, and let's connect over our shared love of frontier romance. If you enjoyed this tale of love conquering all on the Montana plains, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of courage, passion, and adventure in the American frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more listeners discover Sarah and Jake's beautiful love story. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunrise.